All right, good afternoon, everyone. Great to have you here. Welcome to the start of the fall semester and to CS161. Um, Sorry to do this by Zoom. I'd love to see your faces and be together in a room with you, but Labor Day. All right, so hope you're all well. We're going to jump right into what's happening in this course. So this is a course about computer security, and I want to tell you a little bit about logistics. Maybe we'll just discuss anything that's unclear, and talk a little bit about what is security, why we should care, and then we're going to dive into a ton of content today. Um, Goals for this class. I want to help you practice how to think adversarially about computer systems, how to think about what ways bad guys might try to exploit them, and then what you can do to stop that, how you can evaluate potential threats, how you can build systems that will be secure and will defend against hacks and protect people's privacy and be safe and secure. I want to, well, I can't fully teach you about all the limitations and strengths of today's technology, but give you enough of an idea that you could explore these things on your own and assess them yourselves. And also, you're going to get some experience with attacks yourself and hacking computers and see how that actually works at the nitty-gritty level. And then we're going to try to learn from history. We're going to see a whole bunch of mistakes people have made over the decades, and we'll try to learn from that. We'll try to learn some lessons from that. So there's a couple of topics in this course. I'm going to start with just a little bit of a basic intro about some design principles, and then the first major module will be on memory safety. Memory safety vulnerabilities are one large class of ways that people attack computers today. So we'll look at what the vulnerabilities are, how to exploit them, and then we'll look at how to protect against them. And then we'll move to the next major module, which is about cryptography, and that's about how to securely communicate. And then we'll look at security on the web, and we'll look at network security, defending against attackers who are maybe on the other side of the world attacking us over communication networks. And then we'll maybe do a few case studies. And along the way, you get to learn some non-security stuff. One of the things I find fun about this class is that we get to teach you a little bit of a super fast speed run through a few topics. A little bit about how computers work at the architectural level, a little bit about how the web works, and a little bit about how the internet works. So hopefully that'll be useful even if you never again want to touch security the rest of your lives. And then along the way, maybe you'll also learn some practical skills, like get a little bit of hands-on experience with x86 assembly language, with using GDB for debuggers, for learning how memory layout is and how programs work and other stuff. Okay, so I hope we get to have some fun in this class too. Um, Logistics. There's a ton of stuff on the webpage about how this course works and all the policies and all of the homeworks and the projects and when they'll be due and when exams are and how to get help and discussion sections. And I'm not going to go through all of that in loving detail. So just read the webpage, or you can look through the slide deck online. There's some hidden slides with a ton of info. Um, um, some highlights for you that might be relevant, particularly this week. Discussions and office hours start this week, starting tomorrow. Well, starting tonight. Discussion starts tonight. You can attend any discussion section if you want. It's optional. Attendance is not taken. I think it's a useful resource. Up to you. You can figure out whether you find it useful. Lectures. Oh man, this is it's got to be one of the most cursed sentences that I have ever said in my history of teaching. Lectures are 3 hours long, 2 to 5 p.m. on Mondays. And even worse, our lecture hall has limited capacity. So I'm so sorry. I feel terrible about this. 3 hour lecture just sounds like a nightmare. Um, this is when we could get a room. So, like, it's a disaster zone. I'll try to make lecture not horrible, terrible. But if you could think of something I could do to make 3 hour lectures less painful, or if you just need a break, like raise your hand and just like we'll take a break anytime you need one. Because oh man, 3 hours. And also, I should let you know that our oh, I hate saying this, but our lecture hall has limited capacity for like 170 students, and there's like 400 of you signed up. And so, if you all come to lecture next Monday, there won't be room for all of you. And I hate that. I want there to be room for everyone who wants to be there to be there. But um, that's what we got. So it's going to be live. I'm going to do this live, lectures live on Zoom as well if you prefer to attend by Zoom. And it'll also be recorded. But I hope you'll come because I suspect that we won't fill it up on Monday. Um, exam dates are on the website. We have a pretty generous extensions policy. If you need an extension for any reason, please ask. We won't be upset that you need an extension. Like life happens and stuff happens, and your well-being is important to us. And if you need support, we have various ways that our course staff can provide you support. Um, I see questions in chat, and that's great. I love it. I want you to interrupt me during lectures. I want you to like, uh, well, today we're on Zoom. Like, make my chat scroll. I love it. Go crazy. Or you raise your hand and ask a question, or just unmute yourself and ask a question. That's all good. Um, I'll say a few things and then we'll check and see if you have any questions or anything you want me to touch on. We're getting started right away. So today's lecture, we're like diving fully into things. Lectures normally on Mondays. I'm doing this kind of makeup today, even though it's not a Monday because Labor Day was messing everything up. Missing an entire week of lectures was too much. We're jumping right into assignments. So homework one is due this Friday. You will learn today everything you need to know to do the homework. So like get started on it. This will be your last announcement and reminder that there's a homework due this Friday. And also in this course we're gonna have vitamins. So vitamins are a weekly like mini quiz. They're like a checkpoint. Goal of them is to like should be if you've been following along, my hope is they're super fast and easy, like 5, 10, 15 minutes max. Um, um, but it gives me a way to check and see like if I totally lost you guys, then I see all sorts of wrong stuff on the vitamin, then I know, oh, I screwed up, I better go back to it. And also, this is also intended as a way for you to just kind of keep on track with the course. So vitamins will be due by 1 p.m. on Monday, so an hour before the start of lecture every week. So there'll be a vitamin due next Monday at 1 p.m. So this is also your last reminder and announcement of that. Okay, let me take a pause here. Any questions in chat, or you want to unmute yourself? Anything in your mind? All right. If you think of stuff as we proceed, interrupt me. I love it. I love to be interrupted. Heckle, whatever. I wanted to talk just a little bit, get ahead of things, talk about just get us all thinking and maybe have a conversation about what kind of temptations do you think you might face in this course? And go ahead and unmute yourself, or if you prefer, type in the chat, just whatever comes to mind. Any thoughts? See if I can take some notes here. Yeah, skipping lectures, like because they're so long, procrastinating. Oh my gosh, so totally me. That's me. Um, might be tempted to hack unethically, maybe use ChatGPT or AI. Here, we'll be generic. Do everything last minute. Yes. Overlearn, totally. Get like just super bogged down in the details and like let perfect be the enemy of good enough. Any others? Having a hiring a twin for exams. That sounds like the plot for a movie. Acting unethically. Anything come to mind when you say acting unethically? Maybe not. What about homeworks? Any temptations you can think of with homeworks? Asking friends for answers. Another one that I'll share that I've seen might be a temptation on homeworks is since we give you immediate, we want to give you feedback so that if you get something wrong on homeworks, you can go study and like come back and try again. Uh, there might be a temptation on homeworks to like just fill out everything really fast. Any ones that aren't correct, just try a different answer and hit submit until you like until it gives you credit. So let's say you might be tempted to brute force homeworks. If it was me, I'd be tempted to like fall behind. Just like start skipping lectures. I can always watch them later on YouTube. Start skipping discussion sections, request extensions and everything. I might just start falling further and further behind, and then like the midterm comes and oh no. Anything else? Anyone else? Any other temptations you might want to surface? All right, I'm seeing none. Let me try and my next question for you all. Um, do you have any thoughts on what we might do about this? I hate like exposing you all to temptation. I am terrible with temptation. If I buy ice cream and put it in the freezer, that ice cream is gone by the end of the week. It's like some, kind of opposite of Newton's law, like object in the freezer does not remain in the freezer. Um,
I think the slides are broken. Can't see the
oh, you
slides.
can't see the slides. Oh no, that sucks. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
All right, I'm sorry. I was trying to take notes on what you shared with me, and we're gonna try and redo this. Just a moment here. Sorry about that. Thanks for letting me know. How's that?
Good.
All right. Any thoughts on what we might do about these temptations? Anything you could do? Anything I could do? Like we're in this together. I don't want you to have a sucky experience. You could have friends keep you accountable. I could make assignments easier so you don't need help. Or make assignments harder. No assignments. Yeah, then you wouldn't be tempted. Get a sweet treat after lecture. Oh, that's a good idea. I can do that. All right, deal. Monday, some kind of sweet treat. I'm curious what you think about AI. I'm really interested in this. Like, it's super tempting sometimes to like ask ChatGPT for the answer to the homework question. But also, I think it's really easy to get too focused on the negative. Does anyone have any thoughts on how to use these tools like in a helpful way to help you learn or get something positive out of the experience? If I don't hold the deal, then no homework. I love it. You're going to keep me accountable. Yes. I'm sure you must have experience with using ChatGPT to help you in learning. Surely you must. I use it. Any advice you can give other students about like how to use it in a way that's going to be helpful to you and not harmful? Use it for explaining concepts you don't understand? Yeah. Can function as an on-demand TA. I like that. We're going to try and see this semester if we can give you something that might help with that. I don't think it's going to be as good as a TA, but maybe we can do something. ChatGPT wrapper and then opening Y Combinator. Start your startup, cash in. It feels like that sometimes, doesn't it? All right. I would love to hear your thoughts. Maybe if you have thoughts, share them with me. Mostly I wanted to kind of get us thinking in advance about what some temptations might be so that you can prepare yourself to not get caught by them because man, I struggle with temptation. I guess I'll move on. We have a whole bunch of course staff here who would love to support you. That's their job. We're going to have a ton of office hours, so please come visit us. Please come visit me. I love seeing students in my office hours. So there's my selfish request to you all. We don't if you come visit my office hours, you don't have anything to talk about. You don't need to have a question. You can bring one. It doesn't have to be anything about this course. We can just chat about anything, anything. Um, or I can tell you about stuff that I'm excited about if you don't have a conversation started. I don't want you to feel intimidated about coming to office hours. Our office hours will be primarily in person. You can find details on the course website. When you show up, there's a queue that you sign up for, oh.cs161.org. Um, and someone should be able to help you soon. We also are trying to answer questions promptly on Ed, so please feel free to ask there. Don't hesitate to ask for help. We don't want you to sit stuck um, and spinning your wheels. Do I watch sports? Not very much. I like tennis, but anytime I watch it, I just want to be out playing it. So I don't watch a whole lot. But I watched a bunch of the Stanley Cup finals. That was awesome. I love hockey. So you can come to my office hours and we'll geek out about, I don't know, sports if that interests you. Um, I saw a few older questions, so let me scroll back. For exam discussion, is there more in this week? So for discussions, there'll be four discussions sections each week. One of them is exam prep, and the other three are regular. The exam prep is kind of a special thing where we take harder, more challenging problems taken from past exams. So if the regular discussions feel like they're moving too slow and you want more of a challenge, go to the exam prep. But we only have one of those a week because usually the demand for those is lower. This week is all messed up, so we only have two sections because of Labor Day. So one exam prep tonight and one regular one tomorrow. How can you access vitamin one? It'll be released at after like shortly after lecture today, and in general, the vitamin due next Monday will be released shortly after each lecture on the course website. You'll find a link on the course website. Will there be bridge discussion section? No, not this semester. We didn't find enough attendance for that. If there's a sufficient number of you who want a bridge discussion section, let me know and we'll create one. But demand for it's been pretty low lately. Oh, could we create a calendar for you with office hours, discussions, etc.? I think we might be able to do that for you if you want to have a Google Calendar you subscribe to. Yeah. Do you want a Google Calendar with everything, all the office hours, all the discussion sections, or just a Google Calendar with just the deadlines? Everything. Okay. Yeah, I think we could set that up for you. Okay. Other resources that might be helpful to you just right now. We did a C review session last Friday night. And it's recorded, and the recording is available on our course website. So that's a little bit of a refresher of stuff that you hopefully saw in CS61C, but might have slipped through your mind, and just to bring it back to the top of your head, which might be useful to you for Project 1 coming up and for this module on memory safety. And I'll try to throw in some case studies through lecture with like examples of this stuff happening in the real world. And so anytime you see a slide like this with a blue background, that's a case study. Not going to test you on it. You don't need to know. You don't need to know all the details. This is just kind of like as an application or an example of the principles and ideas that I'm trying to teach you. So for example, an example case study is Stuxnet. It was a really interesting development in the world of computer security around 2010. Um, it was discovered that the US and Israel was concerned about Iran's nuclear program. Um, well, I'm sure you've seen the news in the past year of bombing nuclear facilities, but what was done in 2010 was they created some malware. They created some malware, so there was nuclear enrichment centers there that were running these um, centrifuges that spin really fast to enrich uranium, and they're computer controlled. And the national security folks created malware that targeted those computers, infected those machines, and caused the centrifuges to spin just a little bit faster than they were designed to. So they started to break much quicker. And the technicians there were like, "Why is the failure rate of our centrifuges so high? They keep breaking all the time." So attempt to try to delay the nuclear enrichment program. Kind of an interesting attack vector. These computers were absolutely not connected to the internet, so they're not like hacking into some IP address or something. The best speculation I've seen is that somehow they got this onto the internal network, and it's not clear, did they have an insider with access, or maybe they like left around some USB drives to employees who worked there who then stuck it into one of the machines. But anyway, this is very super sophisticated, stealthy, targeted malware designed to only activate on this very limited set of computers. Really interesting, raises all sorts of like ethical questions about like, is it ethical to attack, and who's in the right and who's in the wrong here? And it probably depends where you sit. If you sit in the US, I bet you have a different opinion on that than if you sit somewhere else in the world. Okay, example case study. So, what is security? In this course, we're going to try to teach you about security. So what I mean by that is anything about computer science where there's an attacker. There's someone who's deliberately trying to mess you up. And they might try to violate data confidentiality. So if you want to protect the confidentiality of data against an attacker, that'd be within the scope of computer security. Privacy, if there's someone who's trying to spy on you or gather information on you. Integrity of data, meaning protecting data from being tampered with, or protecting from fraudulent data, protecting against like lying and attempt to manipulate you with falsified data. That's integrity. That's totally within scope. Anything about authentication, how you verify which user is accessing the computer, or availability, making sure the computer stays accessible. Maybe an attacker might try to attack that by like doing what we call denial of service attack, try to overload your computer system so no one can reach it. For instance, we've seen attackers try to do that against online gambling operations. They try to make their website unreachable, and then they kind of blackmail them. They say, "Sure would be a shame if no one could reach your online gambling website this week, but if you'd like protection from them, you could pay us this low fee." Okay. So all of these would be examples of things that be in scope for computer security. And it matters because so much more of our lives is carried out digitally, or we rely on infrastructure that is controlled digitally. So security flaws can be like a risk to each of us individually, or like to the power grid's continued operation. And I really like to have power in my home, so I want it to stay working, and to like national security, and to the health of our economy, to defend against, for instance, espionage and stuff like that. Okay. Is it ethical to hack gambling sites? Great question. Well, I don't feel like I'm in the position to tell you what's ethical. Like, that's a matter for you to decide what your ethics are. Um, Sounds pretty dodgy to me. So, like some examples of where this might matter in your life. Um, if you have a self-driving car, actually, even if you, well, if you have a self-driving car and that car gets hacked, um, boy, that could be really bad for safety. And researchers have demonstrated the ability to hack into cars, not just self-driving cars, but like pretty much every modern car has probably more than 100 computers in it, controlling all aspects of stuff. And we've seen demonstrations where researchers have hacked into a car and like disabled the brakes. Yeah. Um, so, there's security risks there that someone could start hacking into cars and like demand a ransom to restore your brakes on your car. Or if you wanted to get somewhere, get to work today, sorry, pay $20 to disable the ransomware. Um, what about planes? Planes use computer systems. They're pretty carefully designed to try to protect against hacking. They're not like internet connected, but they do have entertainment like devices in the back of the screen in front of you that like shows, movies, and you can even play games on. And usually they're connected to some computer, and they're supposed to be firewalled off from the computer systems that control the avionics and control like flight surfaces and engines and so on. But there's been some research raising questions about that those could have vulnerabilities. So we'd really like to know that someone can't hack into a plane while I'm flying. Pacemakers are controlled by computers. There have been um, various research on how someone might be able to hack into your pacemaker. I think they're pretty safe, but as more and more of like stuff around us is controlled by devices that are controlled by computers, we'd like those computers to be secure against attack. Um, and this also affects your privacy. For instance, one news story I saw reported that hackers may have stolen social security number of every American. Great. Just what I needed. And companies get breached all the time, it seems like, and they're storing data about us, and then now someone we don't know has access to that data. And it matters for national security too. For instance, our electric power grid is controlled by computers, and often those computers are ancient technology that don't get changed or updated very recently, and they're mostly not connected to the internet, but but there are some weak spots, and there's been some debate about how secure they are and the potential that other countries could hack our power grid or we could hack the power grid of other countries, and um, a lot of that stuff's pretty secret or classified, so it's hard to know exactly how big a threat it is. But from a national security perspective, as our infrastructure runs on computer aided stuff, there's a risk. There's a risk that attacks could be a threat to national security. And the rough lesson seems to be any piece of software potentially could have security vulnerabilities. Just so much stuff. It happens over and over again, and it's probably a result of the fact that we're human, and we're humans. We make mistakes, and so a result of that is that our software sometimes has bugs, and sometimes those bugs are actually security vulnerabilities. They're exploitable by some bad guy to take control of that software or your computer or whatever devices it's controlling. And this stuff can get kind of crazy. Like here at Berkeley, we had a computer network once was broken into because someone had a oscilloscope in their EE lab, and they connected it up to the network so they could print stuff on their printer. And the oscilloscope had old, outdated software, and it was vulnerable. And someone on the other side of the world like figured that out and connected to the oscilloscope and hacked into that. And then from there, use that as a jumping off point to attack other computers in the internal network, and just spread from there. And so this kind of scenario can happen a lot where one device gets hacked, and then that makes it easier to hack other devices in a company or an organization or a network. Um, so stuff that wouldn't seem like its security really matters that much, like who cares about a fish tank thermometer with a webcam, can be a stepping stone for attackers to help. Is it true that older software tends to be more vulnerable? I don't know if there's any hard and fast rules, but potentially, one of the things that like happens is we discover vulnerabilities in software all the time, and then if it's new and maintained, hopefully the software vendor will prepare a fix and release an update that fixes that vulnerability. But if you're running an old version that's, there's 17 update, you're 17 updates behind, you haven't updated it, well, then there's a pretty high risk that there might be some vulnerability that was discovered, and the latest version has a fix, but you're running an old version that doesn't have a fix. Also, some older software was not written with security in mind as much. For instance, one of the challenges we have is the internet was not really designed for security. It was designed initially by physicists who wanted to share their like physics preprints, and then it got used by like academics who were sharing their cat pictures. And now it's used for all sorts of stuff and like to send around lots of money, and it was never initially designed for that purpose. So sometimes the older stuff wasn't really designed with security in mind, and so isn't as robust. But with vibe coding, we have the technology to fix that. We can now make new software even more vulnerable than the old software. Um, okay. All right, maybe I'll take a pause. I'm about to dive into some like design principles that we've learned through the years about how to build secure systems. But maybe I take a pause here for just thoughts, questions, topics that come up for you. Are you doing good, or do you want a 3-minute break before we dive into technical material? Break, 3-minute break. Okay, let's take a 3-minute break. Go grab a snack or stretch your legs or jumping jacks or something, and I'll see you at 2:48, 3 minutes from now. And then I'll stick around and ask questions. You can ask me anything in chat if you want. What do I like to do for fun? I love tennis and pickleball too. I know it makes me a traitor to the cause, but that's fun too. If you ever want to learn a new sport, definitely pickleball. So much easier to learn than tennis. And I love science fiction. So if you're like science fiction, come geek out with me. We'll exchange notes. Um, I just got back from a vacation in Montana. My nephew loves fishing. He took me fishing and I had so much fun. That was awesome. What jobs would you qualify for after this class? Well, there's a couple of different kind of jobs. Maybe the most obvious one is you're a developer building products, and it's helpful to have a little bit of security knowledge. So you don't have to like specialize in security. But if you want to specialize in security, one way is like work for a product team working for a security company or companies making a security product like an antivirus or a firewall or something like that. Another way is to work on a security team at a big company. Often they'll have security teams that will like do training for developers or will build tools to help developers avoid security problems. We'll do like code review, often do code review or design review of products before releasing them or during the design stage, ideally. Kind of be available as consultants. Also, there are a bunch of like operations and abuse teams, especially on large public platforms, like let's say Uber or Lyft or PayPal or eBay or Facebook. These are the teams that try to detect like scam and malicious bots and phishing and like fraud on their platform and um, and like shut down those accounts or do whatever's needed to protect the other people there. Some of those will use a lot of machine learning. The GOAT for tennis, oh my gosh. Federer, obviously. He's so beautiful. Oh my gosh. I did Dune 2. Wow, it was so long. Did you like it? I'm more of a Babylon 5 and Serenity Firefly kind of guy, but um, favorite book. Oh, well, if you're a computer, since you're a computer scientist, I'll recommend to you A Fire Upon the Deep, written by this computer science professor at UC San Diego in the 80s. So it's old. It's kind of old, but it's got some like references in there that maybe you'll appreciate. One of the things that happens is like AI becomes sentient and evil, and different races have to band together to protect against this AI gone wrong. Um, is pickleball better for networking? Good question. I don't know. I'm super shy. I'm such an introvert. I'm terrible at networking. What I like about pickleball is you can just show up for like pickup game. Just like show up, open play. You don't have to know anyone. Don't have to like have a group. All right, that was 3 minutes. Let's get started. I saw there's a few more questions. I'll keep on to them. I'll keep a hold of them and come back to them another time. All right. So what I want to do is I want to teach you about some design principles that people have learned over the years. So we're starting kind of light and fluffy before we dive too deep. This is our warm up. This is our taster. And there's a bunch of security principles. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to teach you one design principle. And then since it's like Zoom and 3 hours is so hard, then I'm going to have you teach me the rest. Okay. So the first design principle is to know your threat model. So let me give you an example. Maybe you heard the joke about how if there's a bear chasing you, um, you don't have to outrun the bear, which is a good thing because bears are fast. You just have to outrun the other guy. um, so, what's the idea behind that joke? It's like something that comes up in computer security too, where I don't necessarily have to build a system that's perfectly secure. I just have to make it unattractive enough to attack my system that hackers would rather attack someone else. There's a easier pickings over there. I can't maybe I can't fully prevent getting pickpocketed, but I'm not going to be an easy target because like I don't know, it's in an inside zippered pocket, and they'll just put their attention somewhere where against an easier mark. Okay, so that's a potential approach to security. It's not always the right one, but sometimes it's the right one. For instance, if it's hard to have really, really strong, robust security, you might aim for this um, just good enough level of security. Okay, so what's the idea here? The idea here is that often in security, it's helpful to think about who might try to hack our systems and have some model in our mind about who we're trying to defend against. Like, who are they? What resources do they have? What capabilities or knowledge or skills do they have? What's their motivation? Why do they care about attacking us? How hard are they going to try? How much money might they be willing to spend to do that? Like, are they doing it to try to make money? If their motivation is to make money, like, um, then I just have to make it so that hacking into my machine it would cost them more than they would gain from out of the process. Like maybe it take them more time than it's worth. But if their goal is, I don't know, politics, maybe they won't care so much about money. They're not driven by the same motivation. They'd be willing to spend a bunch of their time to make a point or to like mess with the candidate they hate. And one way that this can come in is um, kind of two kind of philosophies or endpoints of a spectrum about ways of thinking about security. One way of thinking is that we try for like Fort Knox style security, meaning we try to have just the most ironclad, no one is breaking into this system security we can have that has absolutely no holes, even if the attackers are really knowledgeable and they're trying really hard, they are not getting in. So like that'd be really relevant if you're running a classified computer system or you're running a bank and you're the Zell network or something like that. And the other end of the spectrum is arms race security, where you get your security is just good enough that it's not attractive to attack you. So an example of that would be hacking of pay TV cards. In Europe, there were a bunch of these like different pay TV things where you could watch pay-per-view, and you would get this smart card, and you'd pay a certain amount, and you get to watch this, sporting event or that, special concert or whatever. And it just turned out to be so many ways to hack these systems. It's just too hard to defend against all of them. And so the strategy these pay-per-view providers took was it was expensive to like add stronger security, so they added just enough that it was more effective to attack their competitor than it was to attack them. So that's like arms race. And another aspect that they used, which is also kind of like arms race aspect, was every 6 months or a year, they changed around their system so that if someone found a hack, it only was good for 6 months. And then the hackers would have to start trying to hack the new system. And maybe it took them 6 months or a year to figure out how the new system worked before they were able to hack it. And then it got changed again so that these criminals who were trying to make money off of this would like have to spend 3 or 6 months figuring out how to hack it. Then they came up with a hack they could resell to others, but it was only good for another limited amount of time, and they couldn't really make much money off it before again they had to go in and do a whole bunch of research. So they made it a lot less economically profitable for the bad guys. So basically, the good guys were always trying to stay just one step ahead of the bad guys. The bad guys came up with a new technique, the good guys have a new defense. So that's arms race security. Absolutely not impenetrable. And that can be appropriate like when it's just not feasible to have Fort Knox security. There's a potential risk with it too. A potential risk is that you can risk effectively giving free on-the-job training to the bad guys, where you give them a little puzzle, figure out how to solve this defense, and then they figure out how to solve it. And you add another protection mechanism. It's a little bit harder, but then it's like, Ooh, I just added up the level of difficulty as they got skilled up a little bit. So you're like increasing the level of difficulty of their exercises and they're becoming more and more capable and you end up effectively like training your adversaries. So that can also be bad. Arms race security can be bad. All right. So an example might be like my personal security. I might be worried why might someone might want to attack me or my personal laptop. I don't know. Probably not very strong a motivation. Maybe if it's easy to hack me and like get access to my credit cards or my bank accounts, I guess there's a motivation. Um uh like maybe if I'm political, someone who doesn't like my politics might like, I don't know, deface my website or something, but I'm not very visible, so probably won't care very much. Governments might spy on me to collect intelligence. I suppose that's possible, but I'm not very interesting. I don't really have any secrets, so I'm probably not likely to be too much of a threat. Maybe an intimate partner might spy on me if they're jealous or suspicious or thinking that I'm cheating. So that could be a threat, and that could be a very serious threat because they have access to all my stuff and my equipment and the physical access. So it can be very hard to defend against that kind of threat. So that'd be an example of trying to think through what the threat model might be. Think through who the attacker might be, what they might be motivated by, what their resources and capabilities might be. And then once you know what you're trying to defend against, then you can use that to inform what security defenses you put in place. Just how secure does a system have to be? Some common assumptions we'll typically make in this class is that we're dealing with an attacker who's knowledgeable and motivated. There's so much knowledge on the internet. If someone wants to try to hack, then probably they can learn. Also, we typically assume that they know some general information about whatever system they're trying to hack, like what version is being used, whether it's Mac or Windows, do I use PowerPoint or Google Slides? And also, we'll often just standard assumptions in the field are that the attacker can try multiple times. That if they have a 1% chance of success, then they could try 100 times and probably they'll get lucky at least once. Any thoughts about why we make these assumptions? Do you think they're realistic? Yeah, might be realistic, might not. Maybe there's no way an attacker knows what system I'm using. Um, Maybe they're not that knowledgeable. Um, but um, the good thing about this is we're kind of prepared for the worst, or the worst that's reasonably plausible. So, like, we don't want to underestimate attackers. And this will be kind of safe. If we like assume they're more capable than they actually are, and we can still defend against them, then that's kind of like we're on the safe side. As long as it's not too expensive and not too tedious to do. So these would be like kind of standard default assumptions. And if it's too expensive to get security against these default assumptions, then we're willing to revise the trade-offs. But we get pretty uncomfortable if you have a security system that can be defeated given these assumptions that like the system is relying on people to be not motivated because like, oh, that's pretty fragile. If we were wrong and actually there is someone who wants to hack us and they are motivated, then like, we're gonna get hosed. That's not good. So this is trying to err on the safe side. Yeah, don't want to underestimate the threat. Thank you. A concept that can be useful once you have the idea of a threat model, it's kind of connected, is to have design your system to have a trusted computing base. Most software isn't designed this way, but some is, where there's some special component of the system that is in charge of security, and moreover, that like has the capacity to ensure that the whole system is secure. That's the only part that has to be secure for everything to be protected. Okay, so an example would be on my computer. Um, it's not a very good example, but I'll run with it. Um, if I'm concerned about like full access to my computer, the operating system arguably could be viewed as a trusted computing base because it's a small part of the software on my system and it can enforce security rules on all the other code running on my system. Um, like um, no root or administrator level access. All root or administrator level access has to go through the operating system, be approved by the operating system. That example has some issues, but um, we'll go with that for the moment. So some properties that typically we want a trusted computing base to have, if our system's designed that way, is first of all, it needs to be correct. It needs to like not have any bugs in how it enforces security. Second of all, it needs to be complete. That's kind of a jargon term that means someone can't bypass it. Someone can't like gain administrator level access to my hard drive without going through the operating system, and also that the TCP itself is protected as secure, meaning that the operating system is able to protect itself from being hacked. And typically, to try to increase the chances that it's correct and doesn't have any bugs, generally try to make this component as small or as simple as possible. This is kind of like the keep it simple, stupid policy. That this part is the critical part for security, so make it as simple as you can. So an example might be for controlling ability to log into my computer. There's one component that's responsible for authenticating users, like checking the username and password and verifying whether it's correct. And you can't log into my computer without going through that component. That component is usually very simple because it does something very simple. It just checks whether the password's correct. System's designed so that you can't gain access without first authenticating to that component, and that component is designed so it protects itself from outside attack. Keep TCP as simple as possible to make it easy to edit or change? No, not necessarily. No, it's more to ensure that it doesn't have bugs. If your TCP has 1 million lines of code, probably it has some bugs in it. But if it has only 1,000 lines of code, maybe you can review it very carefully and get some confidence that you don't have any bugs in it. So it's just a heuristic for correctness. Okay, so that was one example of a security principle. Now I want you to teach me, design some security principles or some lessons. So I'm going to give you an example of a story, and I want you to like tell me what lessons we might draw from this. Okay, in the early days of web browser vendors were worried about the risks and they wanted to protect their users. There were all sorts of risks. Like, for instance, if you go to a website and the website asks you for your credit card number, you might type it in, or ask for your personal details. Maybe you might type in personal details. And so the web browser vendors decided, maybe we need to do something about that. I'm worried. I'm not sure what to do. I know. I'll put up a warning box. Anytime the user types something into a form on a website, the first time, the web browser in the ancient days would pop up this dialog box saying, just be warned, if you type stuff in, it might go to someone else. Okay. And then as a user, you could be like, yeah, that's what I understand, or no, I guess I don't want to go to this website after all. And you could also tell the browser, I don't need this warning again in the future. Okay. Um, Browser vendors don't do that today. Any idea why not? Good protection, bad protection? It's lazy on the part of the browser vendors. It was like a really low effort thing they could do. Have you ever seen this dialog box? I haven't. Doesn't protect against someone malicious intent. It's like overkill. Like if you're not sure if you're safe, you can block the whole site. That's not realistic. What am I supposed to do as a user? Like I wanted to go to this website and then now it's saying, I don't know if you should be doing that. And my choices are, no, I wanted to go to the website, or okay, I guess I won't go to the website. That's not helpful. It's super annoying. It'd be super annoying to see this every time you go to a website and enter in some information. Oh my gosh, I would hate that. Maybe the web browsers don't want to discourage clicks or traffic. That's a good point too. As a web, if you own a website, you really don't want users to see this. Like people are about to use your website and then they get hit with a warning that maybe this is not a good idea. I don't like if I run a website, I don't want that showing up on people's screens. So if I run a website and uh, Microsoft IE does this, but Firefox doesn't, I might start telling people, hey, you should use Firefox. Firefox is great. We like Firefox. Don't use IE. So it could create funny incentives. But the biggest reason is because this is ridiculously annoying to have dialog boxes popping up all the time, and it's not actually helpful. And how what basically what for the average user, what they learned over time was when you see this kind of dialog box, it's useless. If you want to keep doing what you're doing, click yes to make this pointless interruption go away. And make sure to tick the checkbox so you never see it again. Okay, so what users got trained was anytime you see this dialog box, just click OK, just click yes, just make it get just whatever you don't read it, just make the thing go away. It's not helping you. It's basically a blame transfer device. So the browser vendors could say, well, not my fault. If you get screwed, that's on you, buddy, but I'm not taking any responsibility here. So it completely became useless, subverted the whole purpose because users learned not to read these things, not to pay attention to them, and just click through them. And they got annoyed, but it didn't help them. Not a useful mechanism. Here's another example from earlier in browser history. Um, um, we realized we should be encrypting connections over the internet. And so then the first time you connect to a website, the website sends back what's called a certificate, which contains a public key, which is some information that your browser can use to connect to that website securely and encrypt all the information. And for various reasons, like from a cryptographer's standpoint, you want to, like, it's important that you get the right certificate, and the first time it's sent to you, it could be spoofed, and so there's some risk that the first time you go to a website that it might be sending you like bogus stuff, and if the browser can't verify that what's sent to you is valid and authentic, then the browser, in the old days, the browser would pop up a dialog box like this that says what's going on, and asks you as a user, like says, I couldn't verify the certificate, and so it might or might not be safe. What do you want to do? Do you want to like accept this certificate and continue to proceed to the website, or do you want to like say, never mind, I'm not going to that website? All right. What are the problems with this design? Browser vendors don't do this anymore. Why not? Too many words. Oh my gosh, wall of text. I just wanted to like go order delivery, like go order a burger for delivery. And like, what is this? How would an average user, how would my dad know if a certificate is authentic? How would my dad know what a certificate is? Look at the jargon there. Oh my gosh, certificate authority, misconfiguration, webmaster. Oh my gosh, this is like super technical stuff. By the end of CS161, you will know what all this is. But you take an average person off the street, are they going to know what all that jargon means? I don't think so. Are they going to have any way to make this decision in an informed way? No way. Completely inscrutable. There's like asked to make a decision, but they can't possibly make the decision in any informed way. Be like if someone asked me, do you want your spark plug timing set to 3:30 or 4:20? I'd be like, I don't know. You're the mechanic. You tell me. I don't know what that even means. Um, all right. So terrible, terrible, terrible design. And basically, you could like for the average person, what this might as well say blah blah blah. There's a whole bunch of jargon here. You're not going to understand it. What do you want to do? You want to like see this message again or not? You want to like get on with what you were trying to do and order your burger and make this message go away permanently? Or do you want to like skip the burger because, I don't know. I don't even know why to skip the burger. Well, of course, what any person is going to do is like, I want my burger. Click OK. And I don't never want to see this again. This was not helpful to me. So this was completely useless design. And was made sense to browser developers because they're experts on this stuff. The person who wrote this warning message knows all about certificates and certificate authorities and exactly how you might like vet and make this decision and what the risks are either way and when it's okay and when it's not okay. But and then they wrote a warning message designed for the clone of themselves, not for the actual person who's likely to be using this. Okay, so um, I told you the answer. I was going to ask you what lessons can we learn. Well, you tell me, what lessons can we learn? Suggest some lessons. Go ahead and type in chat. Could be really specific, could be really broad. Keep it simple. This is way too complicated. Understand your audience. Yeah, read the room, please. How can we understand the audience? Do you even think of any ways you could? I could easily see myself making the mistake. I'm so deep in the details. I love the details. It's really easy for me to lose sight of what will and won't make sense to someone else. Any thoughts on how I could stop myself from making this kind of mistake? These are particularly extreme examples, but I could totally imagine making a similar mistake, maybe in a less extreme form. Get feedback from UI or UX designers. Yeah, this is exactly what they specialize in. What they're really good at is knowing what will make sense to average everyday people. So I could try to find a friend who's a UI designer or UX expert and ask them for feedback. How do they do it? Does anyone know? Are they just really good at anticipating how people might respond and interpret stuff on a computer? User testing. No, they're not necessarily really good. They do it by user testing. So they grab a few random people off the street, maybe family or friend members. Maybe they go by a BART station and say, hey, I pay you 20 bucks for your time. Maybe they advertise on Craigslist. And they sit down someone in front of this and they say, go to this website and buy a burger. And then when this interface pops up, they just watch and see what the user does. Maybe they ask a few questions. Can you tell me what you're thinking as you're going through this? What are you doing at each step and why? What was that like for you? Was that easy or hard? Was there anything confusing? Um, Maybe they even asked some pointed questions like, did you know how to make a decision at this step and how did you decide? And usually, if you do that with like maybe even five people is enough to often discover many errors. And then revise and iterate. Okay. So there's an entire discipline, usability, that studies how to address these kinds of problems. So this is basically a human factors issue. The fact that these systems are going to be used not by robots but by people, and people are have limited understanding. We have limited time. We have all sorts of limitations. We're not perfect. We make mistakes, and we need to understand the kind of people who are going to use the software that we build. Convenience is really important to them. Ease of use is really important. If we build a system that's really secure but really hard to use, um, that's probably not a good strategy, because if it's really hard to use, users are going to be like, I'm not using that. I'm switching to your competitor. And it doesn't matter how secure your system is if it's not used. Or another example is if we make it too tedious to like let people into Soda Hall, then y'all will start propping doors open so that you and your friends can get in to study. And then that security system just became useless. So um, we need to take into account like how people are going to use these systems in practice and design around that. And also, we got to take into account how people get fooled or scammed or tricked. And social engineering attacks are a major risk, where bad guys try to gain the confidence of the victim or try to deceive the victim, exploit their trust and or their naivety, and use that to fool them into doing unsafe things. And so when we design a system, we should be prepared that the users might get attacked by these kinds of scams and social engineering attacks, and think about how to design a system so that users are less likely to get scammed. How can we help users, even though they're not experts in computer security, be safe? Yeah, great links in the chat. Thank you for how to do user studies. And also, this is relevant for software developers too. Software developers, when they're writing code, are just human. Most software developers are not security experts. They can't be expected to understand everything about security. Even if they did, we're human, we make mistakes. And those mistakes sometimes, as we'll see in this class, can open up really serious security vulnerabilities. So when we're designing programming languages and APIs and tools, we should be thinking about human factors for the programmer as well, how to help reduce the likelihood that like ordinary everyday mistakes lead to security vulnerabilities, and try to make security consequences as easy to understand as possible, or it's hard to misuse as possible. So like a really nice example that I like is from the NSA, where they have a cryptographic gear and they have some secrets that are used to like encrypt the communications. It's like a password, but it's actually a cryptographic key. And their users to protect them very carefully, because that is the crucial thing that would enable access to these classified communications. And so what they do is they um, tell users to keep this safe, but they store it on a physical device that's shaped like a key. And they tell users, protect this like you would a key to your house or to this classified building. So that gives the people, even if they're not experts in cryptography, some idea about like what they need to do to stay safe. Um, yeah, they do kind of suck though. All right, let's do another security principle. I'll tell you a story and then you'll tell me what design principle we can learn about designing software systems. So I'm going to use an analogy. I'm going to tell you a little bit about safes, buying physical safes. This has nothing to do with computers. Um, Maybe you have some critical documents or some valuables you want to store in a safe. Well, there's a standard scale for evaluating safes and how safe they are. how much protection they provide. And the most basic, well, okay, the lowest level of the rating, there's a rating scale, is TL15. This is already a pretty serious safe. These are government standards for safes. This is a, I mean, this is not just an everyday safe. Everyday safes that you just like buy at the hardware store or something, those typically are not rated. They're not very high security at all. You can get into them easily by like, smashing them or drilling them with a drill bit, that like a diamond drill bit or something that can go through metal, no problem. But the next level up is like a rated safes, and the lowest level of rating is TL15. And what that stands for is a safe that has like thick enough, sturdy enough metal walls, like well enough designed lock that with ordinary common tools like a screwdriver and a crowbar and a drill, um, that it's going to take you at least 15 minutes to get into this safe. And by the way, if you want to go buy these things, expect to pay like 3,000 bucks or more. Okay. So like government offices will have like certain class of materials that they say, this needs to be stored in a safe rated at least TL15 or better, anytime, like there's no one around. They're not. Okay. Um, so the TL is for common tools and 15 is 15 minutes. Any ideas why we care about how long it takes to break in? Why not like TL infinity or TL a year or something like that? You might lock yourself out. Okay, so you'd like a if you lock yourself out, you forget the combination. You'd like a locksmith to be able to come in and with enough tools get in. Okay, what else? Cost. Yeah, the longer you want this to like last against someone who's trying to get in, the more security you want, the more it's going to cost. You need like thicker metal walls, and maybe you need like, I don't know, titanium instead of aluminum, and it's going to cost you more. It's going to be heavier. Okay. So why 15? Turns out 15, the way you select, how do you select a number like 15? It doesn't have to be 15. You can get a safe that is TL30. It's rated that it'll take someone with common tools at least 30 minutes to get in. And as you suspected, that'll cost you more. It's sturdier. It's got like, look at the thickness of the door on that thing. Um, the way you choose this is typically facilities that are protecting this really sensitive stuff will have like burglar alarms, physical security alarms. So that if someone breaks in and starts trying to get at stuff in the safe, then the burglar alarm will go off. It'll notify the police or your like military police or your rapid response team. And the safe tells you what response team you need to have from your security force, your security guards. If you're confident a security guard will get there within 15 minutes, then a TL15 safe is enough. But if you're pretty isolated and a long way away from the military police, and this is on some military base, but it'd take them 30 minutes to get there, then you better have a TL30 safe, because a TL15 safe is not enough. Someone could break in. After 15 minutes they got access, and it gives them 15 minutes to get away before your responders arrive. And if you're worried about attackers who have more than just common tools, like you can get a safe that is secure against not just ordinary tools, but also against like cutting torch. Cutting torch turns out to be like really, really powerful way to break into safes. And if you want security against that, it costs even more. Like, whoa, really expensive device. And if you want 60 minutes against common tools and a cutting torch and also up to 4 ounces of explosives, you can buy that. But now you're spending more than $50,000, and it is this monster beast. Okay, what what lessons would you just draw from this for computer security, or what principles could we take away that might be relevant to software systems? Why am I telling you this example? What can we learn? You want the best security for the lowest cost. Yeah. And there's often a trade-off between the two. More security costs more. What else? Security that matches your needs. I don't want to spend more than I have to. So figure out what my needs are and then get enough security for my needs, but don't go overkill. Always go with the lowest cost, most efficient security. That'll be good enough. What else? Don't waste money for higher security. It's possible to be not secure enough, but it's also possible to be too secure. Too secure, you maybe spent more than you should have on this. So a way that this principle is often formulated is saying security is economics. It's about like making these economic calculations about um, how much security do I need? How much is at risk? And how much will it cost me? And managing the trade-off between that. And so typically we need to do some kind of cost-benefit analyses. Like if we're thinking about attackers motivated by money, then the expected benefit to the attacker should be smaller than the expected cost of attack. And for another example is that I don't spend more on security than the item's worth. Like there's some amount that maybe I might expect to lose if I have no security. Don't spend more than that on security. So for instance, if I have a you know, a super cheapo $150 bike, I don't buy a $500 bike lock for that thing. Another example of that is that it also affects how attackers behave. Attackers don't waste money either. So, for instance, if they have a brand new exploit that will work against any iPhone, even fully updated iPhones, just by sending a text message to it, they're not going to use probably that exploit against me, against some random person. They're going to save that for a really high value target. Because if they use it against some random person, there's a risk they might get discovered and then it gets reported to Apple and then Apple fixes it and their vulnerability no longer works. So instead, they're probably going to hoard that vulnerability and save it until they have a really high value target to use it. So for example, these kinds of iPhone security exploits, it's hard to tell, but it seems like there's an underground market where they sell for over $1 million. If you have find such a vulnerability and you fully work out an exploit, then you can sell it to companies that do this kind of surveillance stuff that work with national security agencies for over $1 million. So that is itself a measure of how secure iPhones are. That if I'm only protecting, the few $1,000s in my bank account, iPhone's probably secure enough for that. At least the iPhone's probably not going to be the weakest point, the weakest link in my security. Okay. So that's economics as an economic perspective on security. Here's another example. Home security, protecting my home so people don't come in and steal my stuff. Well, they put locks on doors, but locks can be picked. And then also there's like windows and like someone could like smash open a window and like walk in and grab stuff and take it. Um, so what do we do about that? A very common thing is you'll like see these signs and people will have burglar alarms so that if someone breaks in, they'll be detected, call the police, and the police will show up and maybe they'll catch the burglar. So hopefully that deters burglars. Ideally, burglar alarms hopefully deter burglars, even though I can't prevent it. Like it's just not economically feasible to like prevent someone from smashing a window and getting into my home. Like I can't. I can't. I mean, I guess I could get rid of all my windows, but who wants to live that way? So hopefully burglar alarms deter break-ins. Though there are some problems. Like one problem with them is they're gonna have too many false alarms. And then that can mean the security companies just kind of, or the police don't respond because they're so used to so many of the alarms are false alarms and nothing actually bad actually happened. It was just like someone's cat jumped and it, caused the sensor to go off. Also, another interesting thing about this is that you can buy these signs without actually buying Burglar alarm. If you have a burglar alarm, you want to put the sign up so the burglars know not to come here because like you don't want them breaking in. But it also means that some people can freeload off of that by like just putting up the sign rather than having the burglar alarm, and maybe that will deter some thieves. Um, all right, so in that setting with our home, we're like focusing on I can't prevent the attacks, but like at least I can detect them. Any lessons for software systems? I guess maybe the obvious one is one I just said. If you can't prevent, detect. So how do we do that? That means we need to build systems so that there's some way to detect. And maybe we can learn some lessons from burglar alarms, which are detectors. Same kind of things will happen with detection in software systems. So the principle is if it's too expensive to prevent attacks, can you detect them? Try to find a way to detect them. And the hopes are there, maybe if you can detect them and then maybe they'll get prosecuted if they're detected, then maybe there's some deterrence that like attackers won't because they're too scared of getting caught. Or um, another way is maybe if you can detect the attack, you can like quickly respond and like fix, kick the attacker out of your network, repair the damage, get back to where you were, be safe again. So that's another way you can support this principle is by not only having a way to detect intrusions on your system, but also by a way to respond to like um, return everything to a clean state. Can you think of any way that you in your like personal computing life can support the response? You could do you could do detection by like buying antivirus software. How could you make sure you have a way to respond if your computer gets hacked? Silence. Oh, this is bad news. This lecture is going on too long. Turn on notifications. Turn on notifications for login detections. Yeah, some places will let you like send an email if they see a login from a new IP address. So that may be useful for detection. Yeah. Um, make sure your power button is working. Yeah. So the question was, what are some techniques you could use for response, for responding if someone hacks into your computer? How could you respond? Or what could you do now to make sure you'll be able to respond? I could make sure my power button's working. If I detect that someone's hacking my computer right now, I can turn it off. Okay, if I have a working power button, that's one way to respond. What if I discover, oh shoot, someone hacked my computer yesterday. They changed around all my files, put some backdoors in all of my software. Now every time I boot the thing up, there's malware running. It's giving me a ransomware message. Oh, disaster. Turn off the internet. Uh-huh. Change all my passwords. Yeah, if they've hacked into like my Google account, changing my password might be enough so that they can't don't have any further access after that. Yeah. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Change my passwords. In advance if I can have a backup. Oh yeah, if I take backups regularly, then if my machine gets infected with ransomware, then maybe I can restore to backup. And I'm back to a clean state. I might have lost a couple of days work since the last backup, but at least I don't have all sorts of backdoors on all my computers. Okay, good. So all these would be those would be examples of detection and response. And to for this to be viable, this means you need to plan ahead. You need to plan ahead so you're making backups. You got to be prepared that bad things will happen. So like, you know, good advice for living in this area is have some stockpiles, enough like water and supplies that you can survive in place for 1 week. So that takes advanced preparation so that you have a way to respond when you detect that something bad has happened. And you may need to design your software systems with the potential for response in mind. Like make a way, for instance, Google accounts are designed so that you can change your password. And moreover, if anyone's currently logged in and you change your password, all current logins get canceled. So that's an effective way to kick out anyone who's got access to your account. Google deliberately designed it that way. So you can deliberately design your software to support response and support detection. An example of a violation of this principle would be Bitcoin, sending money through cryptocurrency. Bitcoin transactions are reversible. If someone steals money from your wallet, it's gone. You're never getting that money back again. Okay. And exchanges in particular have suffered a bunch of large breaches. They're really juicy targets because they store a whole lot of money for a lot of their users, their clients. And so someone finds a vulnerability in one of these exchanges, they're able to steal wholesale from a whole lot of people all at once. So there, even if you can detect, there's no way to respond. Really, really dangerous. That means in those kinds of settings where there's no way to detect or no way to respond, it means your prevention game had better be awesome. All right, let's do another example. This one's a physical security example. In the old days, people used to build castles to like protect their city. And they'd make these giant, big, sturdy, tall walls so they could hide everybody behind the walls if they got attacked by an opposing army. And not just a wall, actually, often there'd be a moat with like a ditch with water to make it hard for people to like come up to the wall and start trying to hammer away at the bricks or whatever. And then, oh, by the way, not just a moat, actually they'd have a wall and then they'd have a moat and then they'd have another wall, so they'd have an inner wall and an outer wall. And the idea being that if someone gets through the outer wall, then they still have to get through the inner wall. And by the way, that gap in between the two walls is kept empty. And so if someone manages to smash through the outer wall somehow, and then they're like standing in between the two walls trying to smash the inner wall, you can now like rain arrows down on them or like throw rocks or whatever. Okay. So, what lesson can you learn for software systems from this example? Multiple layers of security, multiple methods of security, like two-factor authentication. Great example. I need to log into CalNet. I need to provide both a password and like hit OK on my phone. That way, if someone guesses my password, but they don't have access to my phone, they're still not getting in. Or if my phone gets stolen, but they don't know my password, they're still not getting in. If someone gets my bank ATM card, but they don't know my PIN, they're not able to like withdraw money from my account. So anytime you can have multiple layers of security or multiple people who require approval, like some large financial account transactions must be approved by two people. All of those would be examples of this. It's called defense in depth. Okay. And the nice thing is if you do this right, then an attacker has to breach or defeat all of the defenses to successfully attack a system, which makes it harder for them or takes longer or increases the cost for them. Um, there's always a trade-off here, right? Because we said security is economic. So each additional defense you add is not free. Maybe it takes up time from users, or it costs money to implement, or it's annoying and tedious and slow down people's productivity. So you can't just like add more and more and more and more. You're trying to make a smart trade-off here. Here's another example. If you want to, well, I'm showing my age, but like back in the era of file sharing, um, before we had like Spotify and Apple Music, if I wanted to get some music on the internet, um, I could download this torrent application. And other people who had installed this application could share music files that they have with others on the internet, and I could go search for other people who'd shared some song and download it from them. Totally like violation of copyright, massive violation of copyright. I'm sharing all my music with the whole rest of the world, or I'm downloading, music that other people have shared. But that was the premise behind this software. Okay, so what this would do is like go search for available stuff on the internet and download it to my machine. Okay, if you want to find music, it was really handy, especially if you didn't want to pay for it. To install this application, you go to some website, you download the program, and then if you use a Mac, you're probably familiar with this. You'd like install it by like basically copying it into your applications folder. So you downloaded this thing from a website, you copy it into your applications folder, and then you run it. And then you run it, and this thing launches, and it goes and searches for stuff that other people are sharing. Maybe you find some movie that you wanted to download, and it now will like download it to your computer. All right. What are the security risks? What are the security risks with running this program? Well, one risk is I got this program from a website and I downloaded it and I ran it. This program could have been malicious. I mean, I don't personally know the person who wrote it. I'm just like hoping that whatever I got from that website is useful to me, but it could instead be written to harm me. Could be like some tempting, it's a trap. So what could this program have done if it was malicious? It could have shared all my files, not just the files that I wanted to share, but also like, I don't know, all my confidential emails and that file where I've written down my bank passwords and all my secret stuff. It could have deleted all my files because any program that I run is presumed to be acting on my behalf and access to all my files. So this program, when it's run, could have deleted all my files. It could have uploaded my files to some server and then deleted them and then given me a message that says, if you want to see your files back, pay $20 to the hacker. It could have sent spam or sent emails to all of my associates to like spam them and try to get them to install this program. It could have run some other malicious stuff. It could have done anything that I could have done on my computer. Could have used my computer to mine Bitcoin. Totally. All right. So this is a risk. I mean, even beyond the fact that like downloading these files and not paying for it, not paying the authors or the creators or the artists is, pretty dubious ethically and is a violation of copyright is also a risk. And this is a risk that I take anytime I download software from the internet and run it. And it's pretty inherent to the way how modern desktop computers like Windows and Mac and so on work. What what lessons could you draw from this? I'm pointing out like, yikes, security risks we're taking when we do this. Does anyone want to take a stab at like some security lessons we could learn for future systems if you were going to design new systems, what you might want to think about or take into account? Maybe what could it like, I don't know, how could operating systems be different so that this thing is not as risky, or what should you be thinking about to try to like avoid these risks? Sandboxing. Sandboxing, yeah. If I was to run this program in a sandbox or a virtual machine that limits its access, then maybe I could control what it could do. Maybe I only copy the files that I want to share into that virtual machine or into that sandbox, and then it won't have access to any of my other files, so it can't delete my other files or leak my other files. That does requires the operating system or the desktop to provide some way to sandbox or run programs in a virtual machine. So that's has to be a feature for that. Any other thoughts? Maybe I'll point out something about this program. What was this program able to do? A whole lot. What did it need to be able to do? Not very much. It didn't need access to all my files. It does need a way to put a window on the screen. It does need a way to manage some of my files, but only the ones that I indicate. It needs to make some internet connections, but not, well, maybe only to specific ports, maybe not to port 25 or to be able to send email. So this program could do a whole lot more than it needed to do, which is why which made it more risky to run this untrusted program. So one lesson we could draw away from this is what's called the principle of least privilege. If we could reduce that gap between what it needs to be able to do and what it's capable of doing, if what it's capable of doing is much less, just what it needs to do or a little bit more, then the security risk of running that untrusted program would have been less. So if your platform can provide support for, we call this least privilege, running a program with least privilege, only the privileges it needs, only the powers that it needs for its useful functionality and nothing more. If there's a way the platform can support that, then it can reduce the risk of running untrusted software, or even of reduce the risk of running trusted software, like from a company like Microsoft, but the risk that that software might be vulnerable and then get hacked and then it does all these bad things. So the principle of least privilege says you think about what powers or abilities the program needs to have, what access it needs to have to be able to do its intended job, and then limit it somehow so that it only has those permissions or those access, those resources, and nothing more. And that'll reduce the risk. So it's kind of like a risk management perspective. And then you have to design systems to make that possible. Does anyone think of a platform maybe that you used in your life that follows the principle of least privilege maybe a little better than desktop operating systems? How many devices do you have? Do any of your devices do a better job of this? Key card access. That's great. Yeah, my key card only gets me into the door and nothing more. Duo. You want to say more about that? Security clearances in government are a great example of this. Security clearances figure out what information you need for your job, and then they give you a security clearance that's enough for that category of information. But we don't give every government employee access to every document ever. Yeah, there's this notion of TSSCI, special compartmented information, that is very much an application of least privilege. But that's probably not something most of us have experienced in our everyday life. Google Docs. Yeah, Google Docs. We give permissions only to the people who need it, only the people we're collaborating with. Another example would be your mobile phone. Apps on your mobile phone actually are sandboxed. They have a list of what permissions are granted. Not every application has access to my camera. If it wants access to my camera, it either has to like declare it and be reviewed by the App Store, or pop up a dialog box and have me approve access to the camera. So phones actually were designed about a decade or two later. Their operating system was designed a decade or two later, and they do a much better job of following the principle of least privilege. And so it's actually a lot less risky to download a mobile app from someone you've never heard of than it is to download a desktop app from someone you've never heard of. So mobile phones learned the lesson of least privilege in a way that desktops didn't. All right, let's do another example. This is cool. I read an account of someone who toured through a bunker, a nuclear missile silo bunker. It's like buried deep underground, protected. They have multiple officers there manning these silos where there were nuclear missiles stored and ready to launch if commanded by the president. And they have all this equipment there that controls and enables launching the missile. And what's interesting is in the control room, there's a bunch of the zones of this, with access to the missile or access to the control room. You may see this sign that says "No Lone Zone," two-man policy mandatory. What that means is that a policy, no one is alone. No one's alone with a missile. That there's always at least two officers present, and in the control room, there's always at least two of these like very carefully vetted um, uh, employees present. And if they received a launch order, they had a way to vet that and then to like launch the missile. And there was this place on the console where they had a key that they carried on their person. They would stick that in the key and turn it and launch. But one person couldn't launch on their own. It was supposed to require two people to launch. And so actually there were two keyholes and two slots and they had to be turned. But they were worried that like, what if one person went rogue? It'd be really bad. I mean, they tried their best to make sure these people were stable, but if one person, something just went bad, that they should not be able to launch a missile on their own. And they were worried about that. And they were worried and they were worried and they were thinking, even though it requires you know, two keys from two different officers to put in there. What if one person like jumped the other one while they were sleeping or something and stole their key and then like sticks both of them in and turns them? So they had one more protection on the console. The slots where the keys go were far apart, so far apart, so far apart that you could not like reach both of them at one time and turn them. They were like more than 10 feet apart to try to make it so that it had to be two people with their two keys, both turning and approving the order to launch this missile silo. So this is like a safety protection against um, inappropriate or unauthorized launches of this nuclear missile. What security principle could you learn from this? Or is there a technique or an idea? It might be relevant to software systems. Separation of response. Yeah, it's like responsibility. Yeah, separation of responsibility. Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah, I kind of mentioned this before where you might, in some financial systems, to make a purchase over a certain amount, it requires two people to authorize it. Reduce the risk that one is scamming the company. Two-factor authentication would be a good example where it requires both a password and your phone. Two-factor authentication. Yeah. So absolutely. So separation of responsibility is a principle that's kind of based on this. And the idea is if you have something is really critical you need to protect, you can maybe try to come up with a way so it requires multiple people to work together and collude together to like approve it or to misuse it. That no one person could like misuse this resource. Like it would take a conspiracy of two or more people to misuse a resource. And presumably, a conspiracy of two is less likely than one person on their own doing it. An example where I've seen this in everyday life is tickets at movie theaters, where you'd have like a ticket office that would take your money and give you tickets. And then you'd walk in the front door, and there's another person who takes the ticket and lets you in. Why are those two different people? There's multiple reasons for it. But one reason is a fraud prevention method that if there was only one person, they could just let their friends in. But this way, like they have some way of tracking, tickets that were issued and like the number of people who came in and the money that came in, and so I don't know. I guess it's like some kinds of fraud. Uh, some kinds of fraud are prevented, like where the ticket taker takes like I show up, they take my $10 and then they let me in, but they put the $10 in their pocket. They actually can't do that fraud because if they like to they keep track of how many tickets were issued because that's the ticket collectors collecting them. And they keep track of like how much money was collected and make sure those two match up. And if those two don't match, then someone's cheating. And this way they can detect or deter any one person from trying to cheat the movie theater out of cash. Okay, let's do another example. This is a funny security meme. You can probably see there's a row access road here, and there's a gate, and it requires a key card access to get through the gate. But obviously wasn't very effective because you can see the tracks, people have driven around it. What's the lesson? What can we learn about designing secure systems? Single pathways. Yeah. Yeah. So a principle here in the jargon is complete mediation, but that's just a fancy way to say that don't make it so easy to bypass the security measure. In this case, it was too easy to just drive around and bypass the entire security measure. Shouldn't be easy to do that. So any way of accessing should be like monitored and protected. And then crucially, there should be no way to get around that. Okay. So the strongest version of this is sometimes called a reference monitor, where there's a single pointer, single software module that through which all access must occur. And that reference monitor has to like approve it. And there's no way to access the resource without going through the reference monitor. So an example would be at airport security. You have to go through a security checkpoint. There's only a few of them, and there's no way to get into the gate like by skipping around the checkpoint. Everybody goes through, and so then they can enforce their security requirements at the security checkpoint because that's something everyone goes through. So if you funnel everyone, all requests, all operations, all actions through this one software module, it can then vet them to figure out which ones are authorized or which ones are allowable. Okay, so this is a common design, and reference monitor, we want the properties of a TCP. A way that this can get violated is with race conditions. So in security context, this is called time of check to time of use vulnerabilities. So it can be kind of tricky to enforce in multi-threaded environments or environments with like parallel stuff happening in parallel. So I want to give you an example of ATM, pseudocode for ATM machine, where you can withdraw money from your bank account. And imagine that the code that's running on the ATM looks something like this. It queries the central server to get the balance of your bank account when you want to make a withdrawal, and checks to make sure that you have enough money in your account for that withdrawal. If not, it like doesn't let you proceed. And if you do have enough money, it figures out how much you wanted to withdraw and asks the central server to update the balance to a new number that has had that much subtracted, and then gives that much money in like $20 bills to you. Okay, so that'd be reasonable pseudocode you could imagine that a ATM machine might run. Now, what's wrong with this code? This code looks perfectly reasonable and is perfectly secure if there's only one ATM. But what if there's two ATMs and they both can contact the central server? Oh no, bad things can happen. Two, you could like have a copy of your ATM card and be using it in two ATMs, like you is using it in one ATM and your friend is using it in another, and you synchronize the time, do it almost exactly the same time. And these accesses might be happening in parallel and they might get interleaved. What's happening at the two ATM machines might, this process, step-by-step process might get interleaved. And that can be used to trick the system into giving you more than you should receive. So for instance, let's say you have $5 in your account and you go to one ATM machine and you ask to withdraw $5. The ATM machine's going to query the central server, find out your balance is $5, figure out, yeah, you have enough money in your bank account to withdraw $5. Let's say your friend At the same time, just after that, goes to another ATM, and they also ask to withdraw $5. At that other ATM, it's going to query the central account, check, and find that, yep, there's enough money in the account to withdraw $5. Then the pseudocode will execute to tell the central server to update your bank account balance to 0. 5 minus the amount you're withdrawing, 0. And then give $5 to your friend. But the code on your ATM is still running. And maybe it got delayed a little bit. Let's say it runs just a little bit later. Now it sends this request to the server, and that's delayed in getting to the server. The request it sends to the server is also, please set the balance to $0. And then it gives you $5. So it gave both you and your friend both got $5 out, even though you started with only $5 in your account. So what was the flaw here? This is known as a time of check to time of use vulnerability. There was a check at the start of this procedure, check that you have enough money in your account. And then there's a use, give you the money and so on. And there's could be a gap in time between the check and the use. And so the condition we checked, then there was a gap of time, and that condition was no longer valid, but the code kept executing as though it was. And in parallel systems or in concurrent systems, it's really easy to make this kind of mistake, to have this kind of vulnerability in your code. Okay. Do one more example that's happened in practice. Here's some photos that I found amusing. You could road workers, if there's something happening on the highway, there's construction happening, or there's an accident, they want you to be aware of, they can set up this mobile sign on the side of the road. And it's programmable. You can program this sign to display any message you want. It's got a computer in there, and it's got a little keyboard, and the road worker can type in the message to be displayed. And they don't want just anyone to display a message. There's a password you have to enter to change the message. But most signs, they have a default password, and it's documented in their manual. And so most signs use this default password, DOTS. I think it's like Department of Transportation System or something like that. So if you search up the manual, you can find on the internet, you can find the default password. You can walk up to one of these road signs, and knowing the password is enough to let you change the contents of the sign and display anything you want. Like these examples seen in the wild. Obviously, you should not be doing this. Or my favorite example. Okay, what's the lesson we can learn from this real-world vulnerability? What can we learn about designing software systems? Give me some chat. Make my chat scroll like crazy. Don't rely on people just not knowing, even if it's obscure. Yeah, it's amazing what you can Google. Don't use default passwords. They might be documented somewhere, or someone might have written on a forum what the default password is, so it might be too easy to find the default password. I haven't checked recently, but a while ago I checked. When I checked, that was still a common default password for these signs, DOTS. Okay, so there's a principle that we sometimes called Shannon's maxim, or another sometimes called don't rely on security through obscurity, which is an even stronger version of what you guys said. Don't rely on default passwords. In general, assume the enemy knows the system. They have access to the manuals, they have access to the source code, they know how it works, everything about the system. It should still be secure. That's the principle. Don't rely on any aspect of the system to be obscure, like it's obscure how to use it, or there's a default password, but no one will know it because it's only in the manual, and the manual is only given to transportation workers, or something like that. Okay. This is a really strong guideline. How could you possibly build a system that is secure when there's no secrets? Well, maybe you need secrets. You need a password, maybe, for authentication. But the idea is that if there's any secrets, don't use a default and they should be changeable. Okay. So if you have a vulnerable system, but you're like, oh man, no one uses the system, probably no one will like know how to attack it, or you'd have to know all this x86 assembly to like work out how to exploit this vulnerability. If you start saying things like that, you're relying on security through obscurity. That's very fragile because all it takes is one person to figure it out and then share it with all their friends or their world, or post on one of these forums for cyber criminals, and now the word is out and your obscurity is no longer obscure. And it's especially bad for systems that start to become widely deployed, because then all of a sudden people become interested in what was used to be obscure, maybe no longer is. Here's another example. Rooms in Soda Hall are locked and you need an electronic key card for access. Like for instance, here's a communications closet with a bunch of routers and stuff like that. What should that lock do if the power goes out? It could, if the power goes out, it could be locked so that no one can get into the closet if the power is out. Or it could be unlocked if there's no power, so that anyone can get in if the power goes out. What do you think would be appropriate choice for a communication closet with routers? Should it default to locked or default to unlocked if the electricity goes out? Probably locked. I don't know if it's that critical, but you don't want someone stealing all your routers. And if the power's out, my network's off, so I probably don't need to get in anyway. What would be a good default for emergency exit doors? Should they default to locked or unlocked? Totally unlocked, totally. You don't want anyone trapped inside. If there's a fire, the fire could cause disruption, could cause the power, like lines to short, your power could go out because of the fire. You absolutely do not want people to be trapped inside a burning building, so you better make sure that people can get out and firefighters can get in. So basically, what's the lesson here that you can take away for security systems, for software systems? Any lessons? Does that have any relevance to software? What should my firewall do if I can't contact the log server where it's uploading logs of connections? CS160 count? Sure. Yeah. Maybe this is not a good helpful setup. What I'm getting at here is defaults. If your system's going to fail, think in advance about what way you want it to fail, what way it's better for it to fail. And then try to design your system so that if it does fail, the failure cases go in the way that you want it to. If we care a lot about security, we want like fail-safe defaults that will be default to being secure if something goes wrong. For emergency exit doors, safe means you can get out. So then we want to default to if something goes wrong that you can for sure get out. And this can be challenging to figure out what the right default is because we're often balancing security and usability and there's no one answer. So you got to just look at each individual scenario and figure out if something goes wrong, if there's a bug, if there's a crash, if I can't reach this part of the service, if my network goes down, what do I want the default of the system to be? One more principle that's helpful is to design security in from the start. It's not always possible, but it's a better chance of security. When you're designing a system from the very beginning, when you're doing the design process, think about what the security threats it might face might be, and then design the system so that you have protections built in Choose designs that are less likely to be, fragile or vulnerable. It can be harder to protect systems after the fact. So, for instance, email was designed in an era when it was physicists communicating their physics papers with each other. No one's cared about attacking. There's no encryption, there's no authentication, there's no security in email. And then now it's used by the world for all sorts of purposes. It's very hard to add security after the fact. It's too late. The only time we could have added those security measures in was the beginning. Okay, so these are security principles. I think this is a good time. I want to take a 5-minute break and then we'll come back and we'll start looking at memory safety. So 5-minute break. And I'll stick around if anybody wants to chat or answer questions. If you're lucky enough to get hired by a security company, do they do the teaching and training? A lot of them will. Yeah. Yeah. It's a plus if you have some practical experience. One way to get some practical experience is these like capture the flag competitions. They're kind of fun. They're basically like a hacking competition, like puzzles, hacking puzzles. Um, they set up some system that has a known vulnerability and they challenge you to figure out how to hack into it. That can be a fun way to practice on your own. But a lot of companies will security companies will teach you, you learn what you need to know from the more senior experienced developers. This is the last slide of the first half of the lecture. We've got another half of the lecture to go. I'm so sorry. Did I like Project Hail Mary? Yeah, that's fun. Oh, totally fun to see like someone just geeking out on science. The love of science in that book was really wonderful. When I was a kid, I read these autobiographies by Richard Feynman. Surely you're joking, Richard Feynman, and what do you care what anyone thinks, Richard Feynman? I totally had fun with those. He was kind of a problematic guy, but he just really interesting hearing about his love of science. How his dad, like when he was young, how like he was super into learning this stuff, and how his dad kind of taught him stuff. Really heartwarming hearing um, the relationship he had with his dad and his interest in science when he was a wee lad. Oh my gosh, I'm getting all these questions privately and I'm looking on a different device and they only show up on one device and not the other. Oh, I'm so sorry to everyone whose questions I missed. Oh. If I wasn't in this field, what career would I want to pursue? At one point I thought I might enjoy being a lawyer. I don't know. I think I probably wouldn't have in retrospect, but probably enjoy doing some kind of systems building thing. I don't know. Maybe making tools for software developers or something. All right, let's get started again. Second half, I'm running a little behind. I got to work on my timing here. Second half of this lecture is on x86 assembly and yeah, low level details of how your computer works. So this is going to be really useful for project one, and also it's going to be crucial background for what we're going to study on memory safety vulnerabilities. Okay. So some of this is review from 61C, and some of it I think might be new. But I don't assume that you necessarily remember all this 61C stuff. And maybe it's kind of useful to know how computers work. And anyway, you're gonna need to know all these details to understand like how to buffer overrun exploits work, and they're super common, so it's worth knowing. So let me start with some really basics. On a computer, everything is bits, ones or zeros, and we group 8 of them together into a byte. And we write numbers in binary rather than a base 10 and base 2. It's really common to write them also in base 16. So we group 4 bits together, each group of 4 bits, group them together, and then instead of base 10, we're base 16. And so the digits are 0 through F. So if you have a byte that's like 1100, 0110, you can divide that up into 2 groups of 4 bits, and then each becomes a single hexadecimal digit, each group of 4. So 110 corresponds to 8 plus 4, that's 12, and 12 is C, and 0110 is 4 plus 2, that's 6, and so that's written as 6, so this is written in hexadecimal as C6. And we often put 0x at the start to let people know this is hexadecimal, or 0b to let them know it's like bits, binary. C programs, we're going to look at a bunch at C programs and vulnerabilities in C programs. And the way C programs work is the developer writes a C program, and then there's a compiler that compiles that to assembly code. And then there's an assembler that compiles that to machine code. Machine code is a sequence of bytes, and it's what's actually run by the processor, by the CPU. Assembly code is a human, like textual way of writing that's very closely corresponds to the bytes that the CPU runs. But it's just like a more human readable way of writing machine code. So your compiler converts the C code into assembly code. And I want to teach you a little bit about some basic assembly instructions because we're going to need to understand what the CPU is doing at a very low level. So we're going to need to know what assembly instructions are getting executed when you run a C program. And there's a couple of pieces that go with the compiler. The compiler converts the C code into assembly. The assembler, as we mentioned, converts the assembly code into machine code. That's done once in advance. And then to run the program, there's a linker that gets run that like takes the machine code in a file and like puts it into memory. And often you have to get machine code from multiple places. There's the program and also all the libraries that you use. And all those get collected from files and put in memory at the right place. Not going to need to worry about the details of that. And then there's a loader, and that like starts the processor to start running this code that's in memory. All right. So the way the loader works is your program receives a big chunk of memory. And I'm going to focus for simplicity on 32-bit machines, which are a little bit outdated. Today, most people desktops use 64-bit machines, but it's just a little bit simpler to work with 32-bit machines. So on a 32-bit machine, every memory location has an address. Memory stores a whole bunch of bytes. There's an address of each byte that tells where yeah, identifies that memory location. So there's 32-bit addresses, so there's 2 to the 32 addresses, or 2 to the 32 locations where a byte can be stored. So think of this as a giant array with 32 entries, and each entry is a byte. A byte can be stored there. And addresses, they're 32 bits, so I'm going to write them in hexadecimal, so there'll be 8 hexadecimal digits. And you could think of it, if you like, as like an array, like horizontally, with like address 0 on the left, and then the highest address FFFFFFF to the right. But for various reasons, often we're going to draw it a little differently. I'm going to draw it vertically, and rather than think of it as a bunch of bytes, I'm going to think of it as a bunch of 4-byte chunks. For various reasons, that's often handy. So I'm going to write this vertically with the lowest address is 0 at the bottom, and the highest, largest address is at the top, like FFFFFF. That's the largest number. That's going to be at the top of this diagram. And each row of this diagram is going to have a place to store 4 byte values, and it's going to correspond to 4 different addresses in memory. So there's 4 byte values in each row. For instance, at address 0, here's the byte hex 11, or in decimal, it's number 17. And at address 1, here's the byte hex 22, or in decimal, 34. And then address 2, address 3, and then address 4 is the next row up, and that's the byte value hex DE. There's a bunch of times when it's useful to look at a chunk of 4 bytes together, and we'll call that a word. Sometimes you'll store a value, like an integer will be stored in one row in one word. And to tell you about how we represent that and talk about endianness, I want to take a diversion to talk about how we write dates. So suppose there's 3 dates you want to communicate. Oh, not the day of this lecture, but 3 dates from spring semester when I copied these slides. And you want to send these 3 dates to your friend. But for various reasons, you can only write down, all you can write down is 9 numbers, 0 to 9. Nothing else. No dots or slashes or dashes or spaces or anything like that. How do you do that? How do you encode these dates in that way? Well, one reasonable way you could do that is write down each date as year, month, day. So the year is a number, month is a day, month is a number, day is a number. That's 3 numbers per date, and then you get 9 numbers in total. That would be a very reasonable way to communicate. Another way you could write it is day, month, year. Also a very reasonable way to communicate. Which one should I use? Either one. It doesn't matter what one you use, as long as you and your friend both agree. As long as you both know which you're using, you're good. You can choose any order you want. It's just a convention. We have names for these conventions. Big Endian is a name for a convention where you start with the biggest unit, the year first. So you write the year first, then you write the month, then the day. Little Endian is the convention where you start with the littlest unit first. First the day, then the month, then the year. Both valid conventions, just you and your friend need to agree on which conventions you're using for writing down dates. And you might be familiar with this, that Americans and Europeans have a different standard convention for dates. Same deal in computers. In computers, some systems like to use big endian convention and some like to use little endian convention. It's okay. We just need to know which is being used so that we know how to interpret the numbers that we're receiving. Okay? So either way, whichever convention you choose, each group of 3 numbers is a date. The only difference between big endian versus little endian is how you interpret those three numbers. Like if you want to write down a date, the difference is how you represent the date as three numbers. Or if you have three numbers, the difference is how you interpret those as a date. So let's do a check for understanding and see how you're following. This year I turned 5-1. Is that number that I've written down here 5-1? Is that written in, would you call it big endian or little endian? You can write in chat, big or little. Big, big, totally big. Because we write that number is 51. It's not 15. Like I'm not a teenager. In other words, we write the tens place first, and then we write the ones place. The tens place is bigger, so that we're writing the bigger one first, so we call it big endian. Okay. So with numbers in decimal, we almost always write in big endian and hexadecimal and so on. But on computers, some things are done big endian and some are done little endian. Okay, so I said that it can be useful to group memory up into these chunks, into words, a group of 4 bytes. And on the Intel x86 platform, the standard way of interpreting memory or storing numbers in memory is little endian, which means that when you have a number, you like write it in binary or in hex, and then the first byte that you store is the littlest byte, like the last 8 bits of the binary representation or the last 2 hex digits. And the last number you write is the biggest byte or the highest order part of the number, which is a little, no, it's a lot confusing. But it's how x86 works. So you just got to get used to it. So if I have a number that I want to store in memory, and it's hex 44332211, and I want to store it in memory on x86, I don't actually put the byte 44 in the first address and then the byte 33 in the next address. I do it the other way around. I put the byte 11 in the first lowest numbered address, and then I put the byte 22 in the next address, address 1, and then I put the byte 33 in the next address, address 2, and the byte 44 in the next address, address 3. So when you write out what's in memory, we go left to right, it's going to look like the number is reversed when you look at the individual bytes. It's because it's little endian. So just like with dates, we said, how are we going to interpret a bunch of numbers as a date? How are we going to interpret 4 bytes as a number? Little endian says you treat the first, the left, the smallest address byte as the least significant byte in the number. Okay. All right. If I ask you for the byte at address 0, you should say hex 11. But if I ask you for the word at that address, that means the 4 bytes at that address. If you want to interpret that as a word or as a number, then you should remember it's in little endian, and so that word is hex 44332211. Ah, so confusing. Guarantee in project 1, when you look at your program in a debugger and you start looking at memory, you're going to see this. And I just want you to be prepared. And you see something that looks like everything's reversed, you'll know why. It's the little endian business. Okay. So I might write on a slide individual bytes like 11223344, or I might write the entire word which is now going to look like hex 44332211. And you have to remember that what's stored in the memory is the same way. It's just two different ways of writing the same thing. As far as the CPU is concerned, the CPU just has a way to has some notion of what byte is in memory at every address. And then we're sort of doing this interpretation. We're putting some interpretation on memory. Memory is just a bunch of bytes. We're figuring out how to interpret that as a number. And the convention there is this little endian convention. Okay, so don't worry if this is confusing or it trips you up, because it trips me up too. I always have to double check myself on this stuff. Now, what's stored in memory on a x86 processor? What's an x86 processor? Oh, let me back up. What's an x86 processor? What would be some examples of computers we might have that are running an x86 processor? Can anyone give some examples? Desktops, laptops, servers, phones, um, IoT devices. Do you know? Maybe you don't know. Let me tell you about that. Okay, there's a couple of different architectures for processors that are very popular. x86 is one that was designed by Intel, and AMD also makes processors, and they're very, very popular for desktops and servers. Very large fraction of the market. Then also there are there's another common architecture called ARM, or a competitor's RISC-V, and those are very common on phones, tablets. If you have a Mac laptop, it's probably running ARM. If you have a Windows laptop, there's a good chance it's running x86, but if it's very low power or very cheap, it might be ARM. If you have a embedded device, it might be like ARM or RISC-V, or I don't know, could be anything, but the good chance that it's ARM or RISC-V. So x86 is it's defines assembly language and instruction set and set of conventions for memory and how you lay out memory and how you use memory, and it's very widespread on desktop and servers. So in this class, I'm going to only teach you x86, and CS61C you probably learned RISC-V. There's a lot of similarities, but there's some differences. It's not that crucial. But I just want to work with only one example. And all the servers you're going to be running your code on are x86 servers, so that's why we're going to learn x86. So what's stored in memory in a program? There's a couple of different regions in memory. There's the code region. It's called a segment, which stores in memory the machine code, the direct output of the assembler is stored in memory. That's the code that's going to get run. There's also a data segment. It's maybe a little misleading what's in that. If you have global variables, those are stored in that region of memory. But usually you don't have many global variables in most programs, so there's not much in the data segment. Then there's the heap segment, which is where all dynamically allocated memory, if you allocate with malloc and free, it goes in the heap. Or if you're running in Java, anything you allocate with new is stored in the heap. I don't know why it's called the heap, but it just is. Sorry for all the jargon. So that's really useful if you want to store, I don't know, nodes of a linked list or of a tree, or any kind of data structure that might be grow and shrink as the program runs, or variable size, stored in the heap. The heap is a region of memory that grows upwards. The amount of memory in the heap that's used can increase and decrease as the program runs. So there's a fixed start to the heap, which is the bottom of the heap. That's a bottom in this picture means lower numbered addresses. So there's an address where the heap starts, and then the heap extends upwards to larger numbered addresses. And the top of the heap might change as the program executes. And then the last region of memory is the stack. The stack is used to store local variables in every function. A stack frame for each function. When a function is called, then the stack frame is stored there in the stack. When the function returns, and that's goes away and is sort of like removed from memory. So the stack also grows and shrinks. As you make more function calls, if you have more nested function calls, the stack is bigger. And when you're executing just the top level function with no nested function calls, then the stack is smaller. So when you call a function, it grows. When you return, it shrinks. The stack grows in the opposite direction as the heap. It grows downward. So the stack starts at the very top of this picture, the largest, highest numbered addresses. So like main will be at the top of the stack. The stack frame and the local variables for main will be there. And then as you make function calls, it grows downward to smaller numbered addresses. So the stack and the heap kind of grow in opposite directions so that as long as there's enough memory for everything, it'll all fit. Okay, those are the four main areas of memory, and the stack is maybe the most crucial to understand. The heap is also important. But I'm going to focus a lot on the stack because the mechanics of how function calls work depend very heavily on the stack. And that's going to be important in the next lecture. So there's memory. That's one place where data is stored. The other place that data can be stored on your CPU is in a register. Your CPU will have a handful, a limited number of registers, maybe a few dozen of them. Those are in addition to memory. They're different from memory. They're stored directly on the CPU. They can be accessed very, very fast. They're not in memory, so they don't have an address. Instead, they're referred to by names. So like EAX is the name of a register, and it can store 32 bits of data. Okay. So I told you a little bit about x86, maybe the most commonly used instruction set architecture. ARM is starting to rival it now. So ARM and RISC-V may overtake x86. You don't have to be an expert on x86. There's way more than you could possibly understand. Just want to teach you some basics so that you can kind of get a gist when you look at some x86 assembly code, what's going on. As we already said, x86 is little endian. One thing that's a little bit weird about it is variable length instructions. Different instructions will take, some instructions can be represented in only a few bytes of machine code. Some instructions take many bytes of machine code. So this is a difference from RISC-V, which I think you learned in 61C, where in RISC-V, all instructions are 4 bytes long. Each register can store a word, meaning 32 bits, and it's stored on the CPU. And there's on x86, there's 8 main registers. They're called general purpose registers. And they have very weird, funky names. Their names are like EAX, EBX, ECX. If you care, I can tell you why those names. It was like historical anachronism. It would have been simpler if they were just like ABCD, but no, we have anyway. So those are general purpose registers that can be used to store any value, anything you want, an integer, a pointer, as long as it fits in a word. And then there's some special purpose registers. There's 3 special purpose registers, ESP, EBP, and EIP. ESP is a special purpose register that's used to store, well, both ESP and EBP help you find where in the stack segment is the current function's stack frame. So they're basically always used for that. And they're not available for other purposes. And then EIP is used for an address in the code segment to refer to the instruction that we're currently executing. So it keeps track of which part of the code is currently being executed. And the CPU, way it works is it goes to fetch the next instruction at the EIP, it executes that instruction, and then it moves the EIP forward to the next instruction after that. Why are they named like that? Yeah, it's like crazy piece of history. The history of the x86 is it started with this ancient processor in the 80s called the Z80 processor, which was an 8-bit processor. Everything was 8 bits. And registers, I think, maybe were 8 bits. And then Intel, like, was tiny. It was ancient. And then Intel came out with the 8086, which was like huge, big deal, very popular improvement on the Z80 that was a 16-bit machine. So now you could have 16-bit addresses up to 65 kilobytes of RAM. Wow. And you could store, integers were 16 bits and addresses were 16 bits. And I forget what registers were called on the Z80. Maybe it was like A. And then I think on the 8086 they got called AX. I don't remember why. Maybe the X stands for extended because they're 16 bits instead of 8 bits. And they wanted to maintain backwards compatibility so that programs you written for the Z80, you could run it on the 8086, but you could also run you could run the old 8-bit code, but you could also run the new 16-bit code. So they had to have a new name for the register for the 16-bit version of the register. And then, Intel came out with even better versions of the processor. They had the 8186 and 8286 and the Pentium and all the current, Core Duo and all that stuff. Okay, so they moved to a 32-bit processor where words are 32 bits, addresses are 32 bits, each register stores 32 bits. But they wanted to still be able to run old code that was written for the 8086 with 16-bit registers. So the old code would refer to AX. In the new code, they needed a new name for a register, the register that was using the full 32 bits now rather than just 16 bits. So they decided to call the full 32-bit register EAX for extended version of AX. So it's like I don't know, we're dragging behind this tale of history that shows up in the names that like you totally don't need to know. And if only people would just rename these things and get over it and call them A, B, C, D. But no, there's all this old code laying around. It's too hard to rename them. So we're stuck with it. So we just memorize these names. It feels almost arbitrary. Sadly, this stuff is all over computer science. Okay, registers. Whew. Um, in um, assembly language, just to make your life complicated, there's two slightly different standard ways of writing assembly language for the x86 architecture. And we're going to use one. And in the way that we use registers, if you want to refer to a register, you put a percent in front of it to indicate that this is a register. If you want to put a constant, a number like 17, you tell the assembler, hey, what's coming next is a constant by putting a dollar sign. And also, the other thing that you can refer to in assembly language is not just a register, but you can use the register, treat the register as holding an address, and ask the CPU to go read or write memory at that address. And if you put a parentheses around a register name, then the CPU will treat what's in the register as an address or a pointer and dereference that pointer and go read or write memory at that location. So parentheses around %ESP refers to a word in memory at a particular address. The address is determined by whatever is stored in the ESP register right now. And even weirder, if you put a number before the parentheses, this is like super weird syntax. 8 parentheses ESP close parentheses means the address is whatever stored in ESP plus 8. Add 8 to that address and then dereference it. Don't know why it's written this way. More historical inertia. So sorry. Oh, all this ugly stuff that you just have to memorize. And then an instruction contains an opcode that identifies what instruction we're executing, and then what data to operate on, the operands. And there's usually a source and a destination. And the source could be it could be any of those three options. It could be like a register, it could be like a constant, or it could be a memory, like dereferencing memory. It's a memory location. And the same thing for the destination also typically could be a register or could be a memory location. So if you see the instruction add $OX8, comma %EBX, that's telling you this is execute the add instruction. The source is the constant 8, and the destination is the register EBX. So it says add 8 to whatever's in EBX. So if you're going to write like C pseudocode, you would write that this would be the equivalent of saying like EBX becomes EBX plus 8. The destination that's modified by the instruction always comes last. Okay. And there's a whole bunch of instructions, and they each do something different. Like another instruction is instead of adding, you can XOR. You can do exclusive OR, bitwise exclusive OR. Same thing, the source comes first, the destination comes last. So in this example here, the source was not a constant. The source is one of these memory references. It's referring to the memory at what address? The address stored in %ESI plus 4. And then we take the exclusive OR between that and whatever is stored in EAX, and then we store the new value, update EAX with that XOR. Okay, so this instruction can do multiple things. It can go read from memory, do an operation like add, and then maybe write to a register or write to memory. What's stored in memory in the stack region is a bunch of stack frames. Whenever your code calls a function and the function is executing, we need some space to store stuff associated with the execution of that function. There needs to be some space for the local variables. Registers don't have enough space, so we store everything in memory. So we need to make some space in memory for the local variables of this function. We only need to have space available for as long as this function is executing. But as long as it's executing, we need to have a place to store the local variables in memory. So that space is made there. That's called the stack frame. The stack frame includes space for the local variables and for some other stuff too. So when you call the function, the stack frame gets created or allocated in the stack region. And when the function returns, it goes away. It's no longer needed. And the way a stack works is that this is like push pop, data structure you learned from 61B. And the way it's represented in memory is a higher address is where the stack starts. And every time your code calls a function, we allocate space for a new stack frame. So we push it on the stack, and the stack grows down. So we do that by storing it at a lower numbered address than anything else that was previously stored on the stack. So the stack is like a sequence of stack frames. We call a function, allocates space for a new stack frame, and pushes that on the stack. Then we return from the function, we no longer need that stack frame, so it's popped off and removed, goes away. Whoop. Okay, so to keep track of what part of the stack region of memory holds the current stack frame, we need some way to keep track of that. And that's what these two registers, ESP and EBP, do. They help us keep track of where we should be looking for the current stack frame. And the EBP register points to the top of the current stack frame, the highest address. And the ESP register points to the bottom, the lowest address. So everything between those two, inclusive, is the current stack frame. So you can see here the pink region on this slide is the current stack frame. And the ESP and the EBP show the beginning and the start of that stack frame. So if the CPU, if the program wants to access local variables, it should be looking in the current stack frame. The ESP and EBP will help it know where in memory to look, where those local variables are stored. Now, let me make a quick aside about pointers. When you have a pointer is an address. I'm going to draw diagrams with pointers represented as arrows. But the way that's stored in your CPU only knows bits and bytes. So what's actually being stored in a register in memory when you have a pointer? Well, a pointer to something is an address, and what's stored in the register is the address that it's pointing to. Okay, so if I draw an arrow from EBP to some part of memory, what that means is that EBP contains some bytes, an address of that region of memory that the arrow is pointing to. And registers are 32 bits. They're chosen to be big enough that they can store an address. Okay, so it's just a convenient way to show you what's in memory and in registers. What's actually there is a bunch of bytes, but I'm interpreting them for you by drawing arrows so that it's like easier for you to understand what they mean or how those values are used. So it's actually in your memory and your CPU is byte sequences like this. Okay, so I hope when I draw arrows, you'll understand that that's a shorthand intended for human understanding, but the way it's actually represented in memory and in registers is by storing addresses. Okay, so one of the instructions, there's a push instruction and a pop instruction, which are used for managing the stack frame in the stack region. And the push instruction adds another element, another word to the stack. Stacks grow down to lower number addresses, and the ESP stores the bottom of the current bottom of the stack. So the way the push instruction works is it subtracts 4 from the ESP to move it down by 4 bytes by 1 word to make space for 1 more word. And then it saves the value, whatever value you're storing on the stack at that new address, which previously wasn't in use, but now is in use. Okay, so the push instruction is actually very simple. It's subtract 4 from ESP, store a value at that new address. The pop instruction does the reverse. The pop looks at wherever the ESP is currently pointing and reads the word in memory there and like puts it into a register or something, saves that value, and then indicates we no longer need that word on the stack, so remove it from the stack. And when you remove something by the stack is by adding 4 to the ESP. So it undoes the effect of the push. Now, you'll notice a subtle point is if you look in this diagram, the value that was stored in the stack, CAFEFOOD, is still stored in memory. We didn't modify memory when we executed the pop instruction. We modified the ESP to indicate that below the ESP, like nothing below the ESP is relevant anymore. So we don't actually need to like overwrite it or delete it or erase it or anything. It just is not part of the current stack frame. It'll be ignored by the rest of the program, assuming the program's well behaved. In this program, in this class, we're gonna assume like a particular layout of how memory is laid out that is like a fairly simple way that compilers are used by default. Fancy compilers can always do something different, but this is kind of the standard way, which is that local variables are always stored on the stack. There aren't that many registers. You often have lots of local variables, so you always put every local variable in the stack. Each local variable has a different location in the stack, in the current stack frame. And typically it's done by the first local variable that's declared in the function is at the highest address. So if you declare 2 local variables in a function, the first declaration is like it reserves some space, like by pushing something on the stack. And then the second one, it like reserves more space below that. If you have a struct requires multiple words or multiple bytes. Those are stored with the beginning of the struct at the lowest address, the first line or the first element of the struct at the lowest address. Okay. So if I have a function here like this, it has 3 local variables, A, B, and C. And B is a struct, so it takes up multiple words. But A and C each take up only 1 word. How would I fill out the current stack frame? How would these be laid out in memory? The answer is the first local variable, A, gets stored at the highest address. It's like gets pushed on the stack first. So there's space for A at the top. And then there's space for B. B takes 4 words. And then C at the lowest address. And how is this 16-byte struct, this 4-word struct stored? Well, the first field, F1, takes up 8 bytes, and it's at the lowest addresses. And remember, lowest addresses means bottom of the diagram. So F1 is at the bottom most part of where the struct is stored, and then F2 is in the middle, and then F3 is at the top. So it might look weird. It might look like some of these are reversed and some are not. This is the convention. This will be helpful to you when you're running a program and you want to look at what's in memory as in the middle of execution. You want to interpret what's on the stack frame. This will help you understand what's on the stack frame and how that corresponds to the local variables in your C code. Now in C, we have a calling convention that describes how you should implement function calls and function returns. And a function call, when a function call happens, what it does is the caller needs to start executing the callee. The callee is going to need a stack frame. Also, the caller is going to have to save some stuff that might get overwritten by the callee. So there's a sequence of steps that happen to transfer control from the caller to foo. And the calling convention describes how to do all of those. Where to pass arguments. They get passed somewhere in memory, so there's a standard place to put them. How to receive return values. Registers that are in use by the caller, they got to be saved somewhere in memory because they might get overwritten and then by foo, and then we need to restore them when foo returns. So where do they get saved and who's responsible? Is it the caller or the callee is responsible? Where are local variables stored? So short version is when you call a function, you need to create a new stack frame. So we need to shift around ESP and EBP to refer to the new stack frame. Initially, EBP and ESP are referring to the caller stack frame. We've got to move them down. We've got to allocate some space for the foo's stack frame and move EBP and ESP down to that new place. So when you do a function call, ESP and EBP get moved down so that now they refer to the stack frame of foo, which is now executing. And then when foo returns, they get restored to their old values. So a function call works by making space for foo and then updating EBP and ESP. All right. So in memory here, we have a region for the current stack frame, which is the boundaries are indicated by EBP and ESP. And we have a register EIP that keeps track of where is the code that we're currently executing. So if we're executing main, then EBP and ESP point to the beginning and the end of the stack frame for main. And then when main calls foo, we need to adjust them to a lower numbered address where we can have a stack frame for foo. And then after it returns, we have to restore them. So there's a sequence of instructions that get executed by main and that get executed by foo to cooperate in making this adjustment. And they save work before foo executes so that anything that gets overwritten can be restored when foo returns. And next lecture, I'm going to walk you through the nitty-gritty of the sequence of instructions that get executed to make this happen. And if you want to look ahead, you can look through the slides or the textbook. So that's all for today. I want to remind you, homework 1 is due on Friday, and the vitamin is due on Monday at 1 p.m. You can find links on the website. Thanks so much for showing up today. I really appreciate it. And I will stay on Zoom for a few minutes afterward if anyone has questions they want to ask. Thank you all.